some of those questions. But before I give it to the panelist, let me introduce our moderator today, Biplab G. Srivastav. He's a professor in Southern Carolina, and he's a technologist and researcher in the AI industry. He has been doing research regarding the same topic that we will be discussing today, and I'll hand it over to him to introduce the panelist. Biplab ji.
नमस्ते एवरीवन.
नमस्ते.
मैं समय हूँ. नमस्ते एवरीवन. मैं समय हूँ. Oops, मैं बिप्लव हूँ. All right. Thank you for coming to this panel on aligning technology with Dharma. We have been talking about AI a lot, but AI is not just one of the technologies. It's a whole gamut of technologies today. So we are very excited to be part of the discussion today. As you know, there are 6 themes going on. We are one of the 6 themes. Our hope is that we will complement the discussion going on. The goals of this session is to discover what are the things from Dharma that we can apply for today's problems. And the other one is, it is for technology development and use. So we hope these 2 things come out. And please keep this as the discussion goes. Okay? The second thing is, we want to identify insights which as individuals you can take, and then as groups, as family, as business owners, as our professional communities we can take. So keep those 2 things in mind. What can I take from the session, and what as a group can I do? So I'm very happy to have a distinguished set of panelists. We have been discussing on this topic for the past 2-3 weeks, if not more. We have panelists coming from India, Europe, and of course in the US. So first, from my left is Professor Anand Rao from Carnegie Mellon University. He has been working in AI for the past 25-30 years, first in industry, then in academia. Next, we have Professor Arijit Patra. He's coming all the way from UK. He is a researcher in vision and trustworthy AI. Next, we have Professor Nomesh Bolia from IIT Delhi. And he has been working in not only creating, but usage of technology in various forms with different communities in India and all around the world. And then, last but not the least, is Professor Alok Chaturvedi from Purdue University. And Professor Chaturvedi has been involved for years and years and years, working in building new capabilities with defense forces, with leading adopters of technology, and also in creating technology. So we have a gamut of experience here. And so today, I hope our theme will be very much similar to Dharma, which is there is no single truth. There are many paths to the truth, and we hope that we can discuss, and via dialogue, we can discover that in a friendly manner. Okay? All right. So while we are going through the session, if you may want to help us understand your priorities. So there is a poll which is on the right hand side. If you scan, you can get it. If you're not able to capture it, we will have, after the first hour, we will talk about it again. So our plan right now is we will do 10 minutes of introduction. Then we will build up the background on AI and all the topic of this session for 30 minutes. Then we will try to apply that in a case study. After that, we'll come to the activity, which is, again, whatever responses we have got, we will homogenize that. And the last 1 hour is handling your questions. So it's very important that you participate, and we try to apply the things that we are talking about in that manner. So our hope is by the end of this 2.5-hour session, which we have been given, and we are very thankful for that, we are able to answer everyone's burning questions at least, if not all the questions. Okay? So next, one more thing is, there are cards with questions and answers. So apart from the survey, if there are questions that you want to ask, and if they are planned questions, you can actually use the cards and the cards will come back to us. So just wanted to let you know. So there are cards available on the tables which you can use. All right. So now what I want to do is I want to talk about AI. And I said that there are many truths. So historically speaking, this is a very small area, 70 plus years, but it traces back to a conference in the 50s. And along that time, the Turing test was defined, which was a test of intelligence that whether I can make out someone is a human or not. Okay, so just like computers are trying to figure out through CAPTCHA, so that was the precursor of that from the 50s. Okay. Next, in 60s, it was shown that our expectation is really ridiculous. Through simple rules, we can fool a person in assuming that the system is very smart. That was the system called ELIZA. If you know, in the 90s, there was a computer system called Deep Blue. If you play chess, I'm sure many people play chess. So Deep Blue was the first system which could beat a human player. The best human player, sorry. Next is, if you're into Jeopardy, question answering. IBM Watson beat human. So game playing was an area to test AI, and this was being done. And the interesting thing here was with Watson was, you just not had to know the answer, you had to be sure how well you knew the answer, because you had to pay money for that. So that is called the notion of metacognition. And then of course there is the ChatGPT, everyone is excited about, from 2022. And when people today are talking about AI, you have to clarify whether they are talking about AI or generative AI. With generative AI, I will call that Guy. Okay? Gaumata, everywhere you can use it. Should you use it everywhere? That's the question of wisdom. Generative AI can be used everywhere, but please remember that there is a long history and there are many paths of building AI systems. A remarkable thing in 2025 was that it was shown that ChatGPT, some versions, could pass Turing test under certain conditions. So we cannot make out whether the system is a human or not. And that leads to a lot of values and principles, wisdom, question of wisdom comes in. Okay, so this is a quick history. Next, I want to talk about what do researchers mean when they talk about AI. And again, there are many goals of AI. Okay, but this is what is called the assistant model or the agent model of AI, which means that there is just like a human, a system is there in the environment, interacting with the environment. It perceives, it has certain goals, it takes actions, and then it lives in the environment. So it is a series of steps, and depending on how well you perceive, you have your goals, you act, that's how the agent's smartness is there. I'm taking the role of a professor as I'm teaching in my class. Okay, that's what I teach in my class. Now the interesting thing is, some of the things you can simplify. Perception, I'm not going to look at the world. I don't have any goals. When a child is born, what's the goal that it may have? Just live. So keep that in mind. Our goals and everything keeps changing. The last thing is, when we talk about agentic AI and all the agents, again you have to ask, what is the agent model someone is talking about? With large language models, which is a small part of AI, there is this notion that these large language models can be called with tools, and you can do a whole bunch of other things autonomously. So that is the notion of agentic AI. If you look at it, the whole AI spectrum, it is all the way from figuring out whether someone is human or not to let me take action for you. So there's a whole gamut of things which are going on. Okay, so I wanted to give this and just one anecdote. The anecdote is, economists have ruined the society. They have been saying, okay, go for productivity, productivity, productivity. And then last few years they said, oops, we forgot to think about environment. So now productivity includes environment. Similarly, consultants have been saying that, look, let's do this thing, this thing, this thing. Ernst & Young, McKinsey, everyone's consultants are getting into trouble because they got in their report citations and all that using ChatGPT. So I'm saying this because the thing which is missing is evaluation. So when you look at the session today, you look at different lenses, please evaluate carefully. Dharma teaches us that we should absorb different views, but we should evaluate. Okay? So with that, I want to invite Professor Anand Raji to talk about technology, considering AI, but spanning beyond that for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll sit and take it, yeah. Namaste, everyone. So great to be here on this panel. Thank you, everyone. So just sort of continuing on from where Biplabji was talking about. So when we say technology, obviously we are here to talk about technology more broadly, not just AI, but I'll definitely go into AI. Then how AI is impacting other technologies. Again, we had some great talks yesterday where I think Nitinji was showing the impact of technology across every industry. So the kinds of technologies that we'll be looking at is, at least I'll look at, is very much social media. So we all have had social media for 15, 20 years now. So impact of that. What is also coming, AR, VR, metaverse, that kind of technology, and we'll also look at sustainability. But technology is not just this, as we all know. There's biomedical engineering, so there's quantum coming, blockchain technology. There are a number of those technologies. Of course, AI is underpinning all of them and accelerating, so we'll look at that. So that's the broader view of technology, but then very much coupled with the Dharma lens here is what we'll look at. Now, just following on from what Biplabji was saying, the most of the traditional AIs, the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s that you saw, was very much based around representing knowledge, reasoning systems. And they were all looking at predictive AI, looking at what the next thing is, next value is, based on history, based on factual information. Call it broadly predictive AI. I know it's not just predictive AI, there are a number of things, but call it predictive AI. The way we went into generative AI is the AI was able to generate the next word, the next scene, right? So this is generative. And now what they were able to do, what we were able to do, which is sort of very powerful, is we were able to capture the expertise of people. The reason why we were beating the chess and Watson was very much we were essentially encapsulating what we all studied for 15, 20, 25 years and built up our expertise in a particular area. All these big companies came and said, we can feed all of that to a giant machine, and now it'll spit out the next word. So here is a critical thing that you need to keep in mind. All that the machine is doing, based on all the information I've seen, which is pretty much everything that is publicly available, and in some cases not publicly available, stolen material, has gone into predicting the next word. Predicting the next word, how? Based on previous words that I have seen. So it is based on frequency. So keep that in your mind. We'll come back to it. So that's the generative AI that we are talking about. Next, as Biplabji was showing, what people are talking about is agentic AI. Agents have been around at least since the 1970s, but it's sort of taken on a new form. Now, why everyone is interested in agentic AI is we are going to the next stage of not just capturing expertise of people, we are trying to capture the judgment, the experience of our 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. If you're a medical professional, you know the experience. You're just not the knowledge from MBBS and MD. You have experience seeing patients for the past 20 years, and that experience obviously counts. So now the agents are trying to capture that judgment and experience from all of us, right? So that's the agentic AI. So now what we are seeing is each step the machine is taking is closer to what we think has something that is inherently human, right? So it's taking some of those things over. Now, as I said, generative AI is more around the frequency of all the words that are there. So it's essentially predicting the next word. Now, I'll come back to why generative AI and connect it back to Dharma in two ways. There are two primary issues with AI. One of them is because it is predicting the next word, it is based on frequency. It is not based on truth. I think the gentleman over there was asking about truth. Truth, as we define it, as Vedanta defined this, is something that was true in the past, true now, true in the future. Exists always. That is truth. Now, the Swadharma of generative AI is frequency based. Lots of people believe something, that's what it's going to spit out. It is not truth, right? So it is generating Maya based on existing information, and existing information, again, there is no validation of that. It is based on what people have fed, and if the frequency increases, then that is, quote unquote, it's what it's likely to produce. So that's an important difference, and that's where, because its Swadharma is to, I wouldn't say necessarily lie, but essentially to take the majority view and reflect that. So that's one of the fundamental problems. So it's not an issue of, hey, we can go and fix something there and it'll all be fine, because that's what its underlying system is based. The heart of it is that. The second problem, which again directly impacts Dharma here, is we all know that they are large language models. At the same time, they're not just language models. They are large cultural models. Why do I say that? It's cultural model because the system that has been trained with specific types of data, and largely English data, Anglo-Saxon data, Western data. So yes, our scriptures are not represented, the different languages and all the things that we have done in the past are not truly represented. Of course, you can go and ask ChatGPT about explain Gita chapter 2, 21st verse as if you're for a 8-year-old or 12-year-old. It does a very beautiful job actually explaining it, but it doesn't mean that it really understands it, right? So the cultural model, the training data is one. But the second aspect, which is a critical aspect, is that the culture is defined by a process called the human feedback, reinforcement learning with the human feedback. So what OpenAI did was the models can produce lots of answers. It can produce 100 different answers for the same question. Now, someone needs to decide, is this a better answer than the second one? Is the second one better than the third? So all the answers have to be ordered, and that's something that humans were doing. Now the question comes, which humans? Who did that? And the popular thing, it's something called WEIRD. It basically stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic people defined it. So this is a term that few use. It's called weird people. And roughly it's the West Coast liberals who have basically done the value system for us. So that's why you see even Anglo-Saxon countries like UK saying, oh, we need our own foundation model. The French are saying, hey, this doesn't respect our French culture. We don't want the Anglo-Saxon culture. We want the French culture reflected. Obviously, China, India, and others. So this large cultural model it plays, although it's sort of hidden there. So there's a value alignment with respect to an individual that we need to worry about, but there is also a value alignment with respect to the culture, the broader civilization, the broader culture. Now, we can say if it's just AI, fine, there are a bunch of AI guys sitting there doing all of that. So we in biotech don't have to worry about it. We in social science don't need to worry about it. That would have been nice, but unfortunately that's not the case. AI is pretty much underpinning every science and industry branch. And it is actually an accelerant, right? So treat AI as an accelerant. Now, just two simple facts. I think some of you are aware of the first one. OpenAI went with ChatGPT with 100 million users in literally 2 months, the fastest growing. Now, can anyone guess how many weekly users are there of all these systems? Sorry? Billions. Billions, yeah. It's actually not hundreds of millions, it's billions. So it's 1.2, 1.3 billion. So just ChatGPT, there are 900 million users. At Claude, at Gemini, it's easily more than 1.2 billion people. Now, can anyone guess when I think Nitinji was talking about the inevitability of some of the things, can anyone guess the revenues of Anthropic? 12 billion. There were 1 billion end of 2024. 1 billion. They were created in 2021. There were 1 billion by end of 2024. There were 9 billion by the end of 2025. Today, they are 30 billion. Salesforce took 20 years to come to that 30 billion. So these guys have come up in that shorter time. That's revenue that they are getting. So that's the speed at which it's going. So now we'll come back to what these things have an impact. Probably 5 minutes, yeah. So, talk about this QR code, please. Okay, yeah. So yeah, one thing I forgot to mention is there's a QR code which you can scan to get to the poster, and that poster is actually over there, right? So after the thing, you can look at the poster. Some of the details of what I'm saying are there, so you don't have to take notes, so you can go look at the full poster. I'm going to address 3 areas and then come to the dharmic point. So the first area is social media. So AI is accelerating the attention gathering mechanism. So we all know that social media is all about click, click, click and getting people addicted. And we heard about all the kids getting addicted. Just one simple fact, a recent survey, 2 years back survey, it's not that recent in the AI world, 71, so this was done by Mozilla to look at YouTube recommendations. And of all the YouTube recommendations that people were seeing, 71% of the recommendations that people did not like came from AI recommendations. In other words, the AI is recommending something that people said, oh, I wish I had not watched it, right? So, and obviously they have already watched it, so the time is spent, right? So that's how the AI recommendation engines is pushing things. And of course, we all know that when everyone starts seeing it, thumbs up go up, the number of likes go up, number of views go up, and everyone else goes and piles on that, right? So, and that can also be engineered. Now, what's happening with AI is all of those likes and views and so on are being engineered. And of course, we know when the majority comes, as I said, it's all based on frequency, and so it picks up and magnifies these things, right? So that's one problem. Take synthetic media. So this is the most worrying part about deep fakes, right? So 98% of deep fake videos online are sexually explicit. 98%. 99% of those target women without their, so that's the issue, that's the problem, right? So the deepfakes have increased 550%. Why? AI is beautiful. AI can create lots of good, which we talked a lot about yesterday, but it can create also a lot of harm. That's where the Dharma comes in, right? So that's why I'm emphasizing more the bad things. I'm obviously a big believer in AI. I use 12, 13 hours, 14 hours, I use AI. I'm always everything is mediated through AI. So I'm not against AI, but there are very significant drawbacks. The last point I want to mention is climate and energy, right? So when you look at climate and energy, so the consumption of today of energy of all the data centers is 485 terawatt. Literally in 5 years, this is going to go up double, 950, which is equal to energy consumption of Japan in 1 year. That's how much we are going to consume. And it's not just the electricity, it's the water, right? So we need clean water to cool, and we are going to consume 4 to 6 billion cubic meters of water, which is equal to what UK consumes in 1 year, right? So that is the extent to which we are depleting the environment that we are. Why? Because now we can give a question and ask ChatGPT, come up with 5 answers, and I'll pick one, while one answer would have been fine, or maybe 2 would have been fine. We want the variety. So I'll just apply the Vedantic lens. So what the Western society, there are lots of groups on AI ethics and AI law, and I've been part of some of those. They're very much looking at AI safety. So that's the baseline. Whereas Dharma essentially offers us not the baseline, but how can we take it for the social good. I'm going to look at the Vedantic lens from 4 different points. One is Satya, right? So Satya and Maya, right? So the Maya that is being created have to be countered by Satya. So again, is it the generative AI? Is it a fundamentally different type of a model, or a generative model combined with some of the older models, which are more about the truth than about the next word frequency? The second aspect I want to emphasize is Viveka. Viveka is discernment. Yes, we can all and we should all use AI, but know when to use it, when not to use it, and how to use it. That discernment is what we need to teach our kids and everyone, right? So that's the Viveka that we need to develop. Third aspect is Vairagya. Vairagya is dispassion. Don't accumulate, right? So again, don't get addicted to the technology. Again, whether it's social media or some of the technology, how do we create that and limit the accumulation of AI? And last one, again, going back to the notion of the integrative nature, is the Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam, right? So we see ourselves as a point with the entire ecosystem, and if we truly realize that, then we'll control how much of energy and sustainability that we need, and not really use the system as frivolously as we are today. And it's only going to increase. So with that, I'm going to stop and say that Dharma essentially offers not just the baseline, but the top line as what we can do.
So, thank you, Anandji. This is a good segue for the discussion on dharmic principles as it relates to the discussion here. I'm going to hand it over to Alokji. And one request is, if we ourselves can be a little watchful of time, then we'll get more time on the use cases and bring the principles back.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Okay. No, thank you. I will try that. So, namaskar, and thank you all for coming to this wonderful conference. Okay, so yeah. So let me. Will it catch from here?
So this is a QR code. Everyone can look at the poster which.
Yeah. QR code that you have. Yeah. You don't have to do that. Okay. All right. Good. So you can. So you have that, right? Wonderful. So I'm going to draw heavily from my book, Dharma of AI, Timeless Wisdom for Digital Ethics. So what has already been said is very important, because in social media, 2 things happen. I mean, 2 innovations that totally destroyed the society. The first innovation was continuous scrolling, because before that it was point and click, but now continuous scrolling, so now you are so addicted to that. And then the second thing is monetizing toxicity. So the moment they started to monetize toxicity, the differences in society increased dramatically. So think of it, why that happens, and it was already mentioned earlier. So we are dealing with 3 different machines, and they are all AI. The content is created by one set of machine, which is AI. So that is where deep fakes and all these fake narratives and other things which are generated. So AI is doing that. Another point was made that the recommendation, what you get, is also generated by AI. And then the third thing, when you are getting all those things, so what you're doing, you're using an AI on your browser to summarize all the things. So essentially everything is happening by different machines, and what you are doing is you are sitting outside, and your fluency of what you can talk about replaces your knowing the substance or knowing the subject. So you're not really knowing the subject, but what you're doing is through this summarization, you are becoming fluent in talking about something which you have very little knowledge about. So you are essentially set out on the sidelines, and you are not really the main person who is making the decision. So the term Vivek, which was made, so that is what I'm talking about, is how do you give the agency or bring the agency back to you. So even if you are using AI, we all use AI extensively, but that is not the thing. But the important thing is how do you bring your Vivek. So that is our predicament. So how can we really deal with AI while we are using our Vivek and we are training our Vivek? And this is where the Dharma comes into the play. So this talk is not about giving a verdict that this AI is trustworthy or that AI is trustworthy. It is immaterial. That does not really come into the picture. So it is the capacity which we want to build. So that is our Vivek which we want to build. And when we are building our capacity, that is what making us more informed decision maker. So if we really, when we're talking about Vivek or we are talking about faculty, we are not talking about faculty as a rule. So this is what you have to do. Because the moment you create a rule, then the algorithm will pick it up. And then when it picks it up, so whenever you are making a decision, it is enforcing the rule which you have already created inadvertently. So it is, again, it is what you have to develop your faculty, not coming up with this is a hard and fast rule which we are doing, because that is something which it will pick it up right away. So it is an apparatus. It is something where you want to enhance your antahkaran. And so there are 4 elements of your antahkaran. So it is manas. Manas is something which is going to generate the idea. So whenever you are seeing something, so essentially how you train your manas to deal with that. Then the second thing is buddhi. Buddhi is how do you filter out the things which you want to use. Then the third thing is chitta. So that is where you maintain the memory, and the memory you don't maintain it in the system or in your AI or your AI agent. It is maintaining your own sustained long-term memory, that how you want to increase your chitta or train your chitta. You can't increase your chitta, but it is you can train your chitta. And then the last thing is ahankara. So the thing is where, if you are using an AI agent and if it is trying to replicate you, so essentially it has certain ahankara of it itself, because the generative AI has infinite ahankara, right? So even if it does not know anything, it is going to give you an answer. It will never say, I don't know, right? So it will always generate something. So that is something which we need to do. So So how do you train your antakaran? So these four elements of your cognition. So there are three distinct things which you want to do. One is you rely on. So one is what I call 5 guardians. So that is the 5 yamas. And so these are ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, and dharma. So you practice these 5 yamas. Then there are 6 pramanas. And so anything you read, you have to run it through your 6 pramanas. And that is in my infographics. And then the third thing is, whatever you are doing, you have to weigh it against the impact or the outcome. And that is based on Daihik, Davik, and Bhautik. Because is it enhancing you, your family, your society, or the environment, or the cosmos? So if you're looking at these 3 things, practicing whatever you read and you practice it, then we will be able to really understand and enhance our antakaran, be enhancing and practicing our faculty so that we develop our discernment. And how do you do that? So that is when you take your vratam. So these are simple vrat you take, that this is what we are going to follow. We are not just going to consume whatever is handed out to me, but I am going to apply and develop my own faculty, viveka, as we deal with that. Okay. So essentially what vratam is, it rethreads the continuity of your thinking, which was destroyed by continuous scrolling. And these are, the vratam essentially empowers your guardians, your pramanas, and your impacts. And as we go along, we'll discuss more specifically how you can do that.
So, thank you, Alokji. Now I will call upon Nomeshji to talk about the users of AI and what concerns we should be maintaining. So we talked about technology, we talked about Dharmic principles, now we will talk about the users.
Okay, thank you, Biplavji. Thank you to the co-panelists. It's wonderful to be back to this country. I've spent very important years of my life here. So I was not looking at my phone to scroll something. I was, eventually setting up a timer for myself so that I don't exceed my time. So it's about the users, and thank you so much to both of you for setting up a reasonably good theoretical framework. I have a lot of respect for such work. I think Hindus and Dharmic people really need to start appreciating that. All the words that you use are not just words. If we are able to create an ontology and then hopefully an epistemology to do all of that, it will go a long way in perpetuating our ideas into the making of algorithms and everything else that we talk about. But having said that, my role is a little different. It's to focus on the users. And so let me bring this down to another sort of more commonplace level. We've talked about what the issues with the technologies are, and just to take a specific example, if the algorithms keep on recommending and you keep on using social media or AI for any other purpose, you can imagine the kind of harm that it will lead to, right? Specifically for children, given the kind of exposure that they might get, or elderly because of the health issues they might have, right? But let me bring this down to not specifics yet, because I don't think we're ready for that, but an approach for what we can do about it. Now, when we think about the approach, one thing that comes to my mind is this word called confidence. I live in Delhi and in IIT, so I have the privilege of talking to a lot of people in the policy world, in the academic world, in the business world. I was so amazed, and I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I was so amazed that because of the harm that social media can get, Australia and later now Europe actually have banned social media for people less than 16 years. Right? So forget the good or bad of it. That's fine. But when this was being discussed, whatever I talked to people in Delhi and other people in Bharat, they were simply unable to even conceive, forget act, that we can do something like that. We simply don't have the confidence to get back at something that is Western, right? And then came Australia, and boom, just a little bit of discussion and they did it. And then came Europe, they also did it. So I think we need to have that confidence. And this conversation of whether we should be banning AI or can we ban AI or not, that actually, not completely but partially flipped in Delhi now. Because Australians have done it and because Europeans have done it, well, we possibly can also think about it, right? So that confidence, I think, is extremely important to be able to question certain things. Apart from that confidence, I would like to talk about the 3 Ps and later, if time permits, not in this initial part, later if time permits, the 4 Ts. So the 3 Ps. I think technology, and which is not restricted to AI, should really be coming from these 3 Ps. The first P is purpose, prayojana. The second P is procedure, methodology, paddhati. And the third P is paradigm, the vision, the drishti of using technology. Right, so just with 1 or 2 examples, I'll just talk about these 3 Ps and then we will move on. The prayojana. Can you guess the extent of contribution to the GDP that weddings in Bharat make? Weddings. Anybody? Any guess? 10%. 10%. Of the GDP? So I'm talking, so it's amazing. Very difficult to answer that question. Nobody has the answer really, and I can't be quoted. If this is on YouTube, Shrikantji, please remove this part. I can't be quoted on this number. But what I read in somewhere, some random place, and the figure doesn't really matter, you relate to all of this, is the contribution of weddings to the GDP, which includes all things that we do in wedding, right? Is more than the contribution of the auto sector to the GDP in Bharat. Auto, that means motorcycles, cars, tractors, everything put together, right? And now, what is the number of programs that teach you how to do automobiles better? Every university in Bharat? What is the number of programs that teach you how to do weddings better? 0. So this is something that is contributing to me more than the auto sector. It is very deeply important to me. It is helping me celebrate my life like crazy, right? But there is absolutely nothing that we do in our country or anywhere in the world to help us understand that better, to help it do better, right? And remember, this is just one of our samskaras, right? Hindus have 16 samskaras, 1/6, right? Imagine if we were to think of the purpose of technology to help us do these 16 samskaras better. We will not only have amazing GDPs, but also do those GDPs celebrating our lives like crazy the way we do, right, in all of these samskaras. So that purpose is important. We can't be in a situation where technology tells me how to live my life. I should know how to live my life and technology better tell me how to do that better, right? So that purpose is important. Second is methodology. Now this is a little serious. That was also serious, by the way. I really believe in what I said. If anybody here is interested in doing that, please work with me. That's one thing that we want to do as a part of our iCase program. But procedure. There are good things being talked about in what Alokji mentioned about how dharmic principles can be embedded possibly into algorithms to help maybe truth come out better. Maybe not the majority itself, right? But I think Dharma and our entire ecosystem also gives us something which is much more fundamental in helping us develop better methodology, right? So we talk about Chitta Shuddhi, right? And how that helps us in achieving higher goals and stuff like that. My take on this, and we still need to do a lot of experiments, and I'll give 1 or 2 very simple examples of what people are already doing on that, is that if we really take this Chitta Shuddhi business seriously, Chitta Shuddhi means what? Right? That we have pure thoughts, the 5 yamas, the 5 niyamas, all of that. Then I think our mind will become such that it will be able to come up with better, fundamental, foundational, completely transformational technology. If we are not able to do that, we'll continue to follow the copybook of whoever has their mind sorted. If you have to go beyond what all of this is going on, not get caught up in these algorithms, we have to do Chitta Shuddhi. Right? It can help us. Do meditation better. It will help you rewire your brain a little better. Maybe newer ideas will come. Right? Things like that. There is something called Avadhana Kriya. Avadhana, some of you might have Shatavdhani Ganesh, some of you might have known him, right? So it's a technique really to help you develop concentration and to help you develop memory. My mind always goes, in all our education, we are always taught about well, how do I learn this specific? How do I learn computer science better? How do I do mechanical engineering better? How do I do, social sciences better? Stuff like that. But nobody talks about how to hone this instrument, right? How to make this better. So I think Avadhana Kriya has the potential to do that if only we were confident about it. Sampath is right here. We've done workshops in IIT. We've done courses in IIT talking about this thing, right? So this is about the procedure, the methodology. The third thing is about vision, and I'll stop at that, right? The paradigm. So what is technology? If a dharmically inspired individual is to do technology, the individuals will themselves make sure that technology doesn't cross boundaries. People from outside will not have to come and tell them to do that, right? So for example, how does it play out? 3 years back, I read an article of how Australia decided to cull, which is kill, some animal, like hundreds of thousands of those animals, right? Because they were creating some chaos according to the human life. A dharmic person will never think of a technology to cull an entire species. We will not be able to think of that only, right? It will not occur to us. Even if technology was sitting there, we will not develop it and will not create systems to make it happen, right? So what Dharma will give to us is this ability to distinguish, like we was already talked about, but then this is not just something that is, platonic, that is just an idea waiting for everybody to, feel good about. Civilization and Dharma has actually done that. So at scale, we have demonstrated, and I'll talk about that later if there are questions, we have demonstrated how these platonic ideas can actually be transferred to the society. This is not just one or two people, one or two individuals, one or two communities. At scale, these ideas can transmit, right? That is the good news that Dharma offers. So not only can it give us a purpose, it can also give us a procedure, but also a paradigm on how to do technology. I'll stop there.
So thank you, Numeshi. Now I will call upon Arjit ji to talk about the trustworthiness, what we need to look in for using it for any purpose here. So Arjit ji, to you.
Good morning everyone. Namaskar. So far the stage has been set very well, both in terms of the epistemic lens of artificial intelligence and of how dharmic principles translate into our own interaction with the external environment, and as such I only stand on the shoulders of giants here, and therefore I will actually take a step at going a bit backward in a sense of like the context of all of the other discussions that we are having so far, and I will take a slightly engineering view before moving on to the trust aspect. And it is quite surreal to think of it now that we are here. We live in a world where you have kind of like the revenue creation and the value creation that we see from like companies that pretty much started only yesterday. When you look at the grand scheme of like corporate societies existing, it is quite fascinating to see that technology that essentially got its nomenclature as late as the 50s come to fruition all of a sudden in the early 2010s and then have a Cambrian explosion like it did. And that really does not have a parallel. And why is that important? Before we go any further, is that we have had technological transformations before in the large history of humanity. The discovery of fire, of the wheel, of a lot of other like engineering innovations, etc., or societal innovations around the creation of urban centers, agriculture, all of that. What is fundamentally unique this time round is that none of the previous innovations forced us to ask the question, what makes us human in relation to what we have created? That is, I think, a very unique paradigm on a technological or a socio-technical sense that we find ourselves asking today. Rightly or wrongly, the jury is still out on that. But at least in terms of like the emergent behavior that we see in a lot of the AI systems that we have available, this is a question that has come very prominently. And that kind of creates a lot of derivative questions which a lot of existing societal systems, particularly the ones that think in terms of binary of good versus bad, or that they are maybe not as well equipped to deal with. So in that sense, if you were to look at the current flavor of the technology itself, like today's artificial intelligence technologies are largely based on a paradigm known as connectionism. Today's AI technologies largely operate essentially
through mathematical operations like compositions of functions optimized over parameter space, where you learn the weights of the parameters through the presence of a data distribution or the so-called training data. And this creates two very important consequences. The first is that we are really talking about essentially learning rules that we cannot describe entirely, purely on the strength of the data, purely on the strength of the input. And the second is that the mathematical operations, essentially kind of like, finite space approximation of what is known as the central limit theorem, that says that given infinite distributions, you can model everything with a kind of a Gaussian. So in a subset of that, in a finite subset, that fundamentally means that we do not have a direct ability to actually interrogate the mathematics or the functional basis of the input to output translation that we see in a lot of these algorithms. This creates a lot of the derivative kind of like trust, risk, and safety concerns that plague all of us today. So it is interesting that fundamentally a lot of these mathematical artifacts that we are talking about, a lot of these ideas of representation learning, they fundamentally derive from a lot of actually dharmic texts. A lot of the fundamentals of like distributions that we talk about actually very well derive from the works that we see from sort of Kanad Muni and a lot of other sages and philosophers over the years, refined in a modern era by the likes of Fisher and Mahalanobis and so on and so forth. And today, a lot of it, kind of like maybe in a fitting circle, have come to the point where they kind of force us to discuss the trust, safety, and other implications here. So what does it mean when you think about it sitting here today? So today's algorithms, while they have scaled significantly, they have billions of active users every week. There is kind of like, when you look at the very simple aspect of asking, tell me why did you come up with the answer that you did? Most of the options that we have of answering that question are essentially post hoc methods. Most of these essentially rely on kind of like establishing chains of thought traces, or in a pre-LLM era, things like doing activation mapping and similar kinds of post hoc explainability. Most of the times when you want to kind of, ensure that what you're talking about in terms of like the cultural context, or you're talking about essentially, ensuring that the wrong user base is not exposed to particular kind of content. Once again, the technological options that we have there are pretty much using kind of like guardrails and other rule-based systems, none of which can actually accurately capture the diversity or the unpredictability of the functional spaces that are learned as a result of the training data. And as such, the training data set or the humans that have done the RLHF on it, their actual judgment and input becomes crucial. Something that we have discussed here in terms of like the viveka that they need to have exercised. But once again, that is not something that is inherently scalable without explicit intent on the part of the builder to do so. So therefore, in terms of like the trustworthy aspect, when you motivate it from a dharmic perspective, I think everything else that has been discussed along with that, we do need to kind of emphasize on the universal nature of dharma as well, in terms of appreciating that every other party that actually defines the rubrics and the nature of these systems, they need to be engaged with, from our perspective, very actively and in a very strong epistemological and a technological kind of grounding, to actually ensure that this perspective of where a society is able to perfectly function in various shades of gray without necessarily being reliant on like explicit binaries, that perspective is adequately reflected. And there is enough commercial justification for this. Like we talk about billions of active users a week. Well, guess what? Like if you have to look at the adherents of like the dharmic way of life, you are looking at least a quarter of humanity by in different shades. So a very substantial number of those active users every week do come from societal backgrounds which current models of trust and safety do not adequately reflect. And as such, if you have to look at, once again, like the whole motivational aspect, that is very clear. The question is, how do you actually translate this into practice? So with this, I will keep the floor open.
Thank you, Arijiji. So audience, from the long session now, you have heard about the principles of these four legs, I would say: technology, dharma, users, and trustworthiness or evaluation. We would like to apply that. And so we were talking about a case study, and I will like to bring this, and we will continue the discussion in the context of a simple example. I will just like to remind you that there are cards on your table where you can put the questions, Okay, and immediately after this, we will put the questions. So please have your questions. I'm sure you are bubbling with questions, so please have them. And this is the time we apply some of the things that we talked about in a specific situation. Why did we choose this situation? I don't know. But I think I do this a lot, which is lying. Okay? And I think that a lot of us face this situation under various cases. We call it white lies, real problems, and whatever. Okay? So I want to take this example and urge the panelists to explore the concepts that they talked about. Can technology help us accelerate the intent, the purpose that was mentioned earlier, right? And this is not just one purpose. There are many purposes. Marriage was mentioned. Should we marry someone or not? Technology can help us. There are ethical issues. Comparing people, comparing different things. So here, what we mean is that what are the conditions in which we should be telling the full truth, half truth, and just nothing at all? Okay, the doctor, should they say that you have cancer? How should they say this thing? This is a practical problem. The doctors need to be trained about that. Okay, so think about that. What is the technology aspect of it? Should the doctor say, or should the person just learn from a self-service portal at the hospital's website? The dharmic principles, the users, and what's the trustworthiness? Can the technology just say something and then later say, oops? Or can it say, I don't know, and later on you found that you had that cancer? Okay, so getting to this, I will start with Alokji. What do you think in this situation should technology do? Given that we have the technology around, right? We are doctors, engineers, this, that, whatever. Should we use technology for this use case?
Okay, so the fundamental issue here is, so based on the framework which I talked about earlier, the first phase is the read, when you are reading it. Now, when you are reading something, so how should your process of discernment start? Okay, and so here, so how does it impact your energetic state? So your three gunas. So is it your sattva? Does it appeal to your sattva? It's rajas or it's tamas. And if a statement runs in front of you, and the first thing is your reaction. Your reaction is does it appeals to your tamas state? You get very angry, you get agitated, and you get this urge to respond to that. And that is what all the social media is counting on. The research shows that a fake news travels 7 times as far as a real news. So it is, so the reason why fake news is amplified is that it makes the platform a lot of money. So this is where your first discernment starts, is that how does it appeal to you? The next step will be, how do you run the pramanas? Okay, so is it true? Okay, so the question is it fluency or is it real knowing? So the source from which the information is coming, or so how does it appeal to your energies? And so before you do that, you have to run it through the pramanas. So whether it is pratyaksh or whether it is upmana or whatever. So that is something which you have to test before you take any action. And then the third thing which you have to do is you have to check your guardians. And the guardians are, is it ahimsa? Is it satya? Is it asteya, brahmacharya, or dharma? So this is something which you have to practice. That is the step 3. And step 4 finally is you have to trace the impact. So if I reposted it or if I shared it with someone, so how is it impacting the Daihik, Davik and Bhautik? So is it impacting that? So this simple framework, what do you do at the read? So how does it appeal to you? So instead of accepting it because it is coming from your friend, your family, or someone, you have to put it through certain paramanas, and then you have to see how does it appeal to your yamas, and then finally evaluate it against the tapas, the daihik, daivik, and bhautik. And then that is when you actually take the action. And that is the vratam, what you need to take is how do you appeal to that. So remember, your vratam, your faculty, it is reinforced every time you do that, and it decays every time you don't use it. So you again fall into the trap.
Anyone else wants to take it? From any lens.
So one lens when I look at this saying no is, I think Alokji talked more about how do you change yourself and how do you have those qualities like Viveka, Vairagya within the human. Now I'll take the other side in terms of how do you get the AI to be much more having that Viveka, teaching it what dispassion is. So just pick Viveka for now. And the large language models are essentially trained to please you, right? So that's the bottom line. So now what pleases you, sometimes you can take a quick route by just asking a question, getting an answer, and saying, great, this is much better than I would have had to spend half an hour. This is great, and take it and run with it. But instead, what I think you can do and you should do before using any output is just use this simple prompt. I use this all the time before I make use of that information. It's called critique, suggest changes, revise, all in one sentence. So what it does when it says critique is it wears a different hat. So first, it gives you the answer to your question. Doesn't matter what it is, any topic. You ask the question, it's going to give you the answer. Next, when you ask it to critique, it's going to go and find faults with what it has written. And just try that prompt, right? So anyone who's using any of these systems. And it's very instructive as to how it thinks about all the things that it can do better, right? So instead of critiquing, then the next explicit thing is, tell me how to fix it, right? So critique suggests changes. So now it's not just acting the critique, now it is acting as a fixer, right? So how can I fix the language? How can I fix this, right? So, and then finally you say revise, then the output that you get there is better, right? So this is one way where you're actually teaching the Viveka to the large language model. And you can actually embed these things into the prompts, right? So you can create skills and so on, to go into the details, but you can essentially make it, hey, go critique, suggest changes, come back and revise. So that then forces, so same thing, references. Everyone has had issues with references. You can actually go and tell it, I want verified references, go and verify. It costs you more tokens to do that, right? So it costs you more tokens to be truthful, but it'll go and try and do that, right? So most times it will go verify and come up with, yes, this is a verified thing. And sometimes it'll say, I'm unable to verify it, or it's actually, Claude is now good enough to say, hey, this is a blog or internet article, it's not a peer-reviewed journal. Fine, I'll take it, I'll at least see it. So that way you are using your discernment, but you are also putting a little bit of onus on the large language model to give you back something.
Yes, I think this is something where I have to kind of say one statement. Fundamentally, what is the difference between trust and ego? LLM today, its psychophantic property is not about gaining your trust, it's about pleasing your ego. And it's not an accident. Most of the artifacts that we have today, the training data came from Common Crawl and other internet scale archive data. So most interactions on the internet for most of humanity have been about getting dopamine spikes rather than seeking independent inquiry. Let's face it, this is what it is. Most of the stuff has been about, kind of essentially making yourself kind of like happy in a sense, which is kind of getting that dopamine spike, and therefore that behavior could only translate into LLMs. And therefore, when you look at the aspect of trust as divorced from the aspect of like, sort of like self-aggrandization or self-pleasing, you are looking at what makes something trustworthy? Fundamentally, anything that is trustworthy, that aspect is very dynamic, it is transitive, and it is also asymmetric. Like, trust is not necessarily symmetric between, two given entities at any given point of time. And therefore, in an LLM context, particularly given the asymmetricity involved, for a model builder, it was a kind of like an easier way out to kind of like, get onto the dopamine hook and kind of using that to build the customer base. And obviously, as the players are moving closer to their IPOs, it helps to kind of like tone that down a bit. So which is why for the more like, contriteness about like giving proper references and so on, maybe. But at the end of the day, this is a unique distinction that we do need to make from using our own Vivek and using our own sense of Satya versus Maya, that when you are dealing with an LLM, what is it that you are actually kind of like seeking internally deep within you, that you need to be self-aware enough to understand that. And that's where kind of like very intentional prompting on what you actually seek out of a model like that comes in. Otherwise, these models are essentially autoregressive models, and they pretty much follow garbage in, garbage out. That is still kind of like the the rule that governs the day. So most of humanity also kind of follows that when you think about it. So yeah, be careful with your prompts.
So I personally, so let me just be a little jarring here, right? I personally think we are taking a very limited view on this, right? We are assuming that technology will be like it is. And in the current model, where wealth is what measures your importance, only wealth, right? You will necessarily always create an algorithm that pleases your ego, right? Because otherwise, why will people come to you? Why will you get subscribers? How does revenue come? And then how does market cap come, right? So I think the question that we should be asking, it should be much more fundamental. So in the short run, yes, let's go with better prompts, right? But then in the long run, can we think of models where this is not the only way to develop an algorithm? What do we need to change for algorithms to be not pleasing our egos alone? And while thinking that, let's not be restricted only to what we currently describe as technology elements, right? To algorithms, to methods, to models. Can we go a little beyond that? And maybe that's where a more permanent and longer and sustainable answer will come from.
Okay. All right. So this was meant as an exercise, as I said, case study. I'm sure all of you have a lot more questions. So the cards, if you have questions, if any of the volunteers can, yeah, if we can get the cards, please. Yeah, can someone collect the cards and. Yeah. And while we are waiting, this is a couple of hands. Yeah. And yeah, people can. Okay. The other thing is, while we are waiting for the cards, if you have feedback on like this is the use case study we should discuss, please use the QR code, put it there, and also similarly any other topic. Yeah.
I'm partly speculating. Let's say 10 years down the line, doctor diagnoses that I need a knee surgery on the right way, right? That morning my group, the bed, the humanoid, as 10 years down the line, AI and robotics will be going hand in hand. Right? The humanoid comes in, he does the surgery on the left instead of the right. Whom shall I sue?
So the question is about suing, okay? And if so if you remember Sri Devi's father, I think, had the same problem. The surgery was done by the doctor on the wrong side of the head. So that's the question, whom should be sued?
Okay, so I work largely in AI for healthcare. Currently, I'm a scientist in a pharma company as well, and therefore I want to address the responsibility aspect in some level of like, let's say, technical/philosophical detail. Purely in terms of whom you should sue depends on where you are, which jurisdiction you are in. That's the standard lawyer answer, and so that's the answer I will stick with. But at the end of the day, if you look at pretty much most jurisdictions which do medical robotics today, there is always an assumption of human supervision, and that's, I don't think, disappearing anytime soon. So we do use, by the way, it's not 10 years that AI and robotics will go hand in hand. There is a lot of that happening already. A lot of like medical robots today, Da Vinci, etc. They are actually quite good in terms of like making kind of like predictive suggestions in terms of like, say, tumor biopsies and things like that, in terms of fine-grained motion, etc. And there is a fundamental expectation that these are kind of only assistive and not prescriptive to the surgeon involved. And therefore, there is kind of like a level of responsibility that is almost always assigned, and you can kind of figure out who to sue using that. And there is another aspect there in terms of the intermediary responsibility that falls on the manufacturer of the device or the algorithm. And this is where a lot of the divergent views are in terms of how emerging AI regulation like the EU AI Act, etc. are taking. And there is some level of lack of clarity in terms of to what extent the high risk provisions, for example, of the EU AI Act might apply specifically to the aspect of the algorithmic component of a medical robot like that, given that normally in a commercial setting that would fall under what is known as a level 4 risk category. And you have differential kind of risk thresholds in terms of the application domain in other parts of the world. Like in China, for example, you have a very different aspect of viewing how risk is quantified in this kind of a situation. And in India, the discourse is still emerging. And in the US, there is quite a bit of back and forth. And there is also a lot of provincial level discussion happening on this. So that intermediary responsibility aspect, for example, instead of the robot itself operating on the left versus right, what if the robot advises the doctor to operate on the left, while there is enough evidence available that the right kidney or the right side of the liver, etc., should have been operated upon? That's where a lot of these things would actually kick in.
Meaning you are Bhagwan Bharose or that human Bharose? Okay. So this question is for Anand Raoji. Do you think AI can eventually rule over moral ethical relativism?
He's going to ask him. Huh? He's going to ask on Is it okay to speak the question?
Yeah. Rule over moral and ethical relativism. So I think to me the notion of spirituality, right? So morality is something that's more from the humans. So we would define what it is, and it can follow rules, right? So to me, I'm not sure I agree with the eventually take over. It can start mimicking. So it is sort of essentially mimics everything. There are ethical rules which have been embedded in those, right? So again, there is a whole international community which has worked literally for, I think, 6 to 8 years before it all became into the EU AI Act, bias and fairness, explainability, safety, and so on. Now, again, I come back to the same thing. If it is ethical principles, there's a baseline of ethical principles, but then after that, it's whose ethical principles, right? So whose ethical principles is the AI following? I'll just give you one simple example again. In Western society, because of their background, because of the nature in US and elsewhere, individual liberty is highly looked upon, right? So individual liberty is at the highest level compared to social good. If I can do something, if I sacrifice something for the social good, that's seen as a positive in Eastern societies. I would say Indian, definitely Korean, Japanese, Chinese, we all little bit of sacrifice. But today, the way the ethical principles are structured, individual liberty has to come first, right? So as soon as anything is mentioned about social good, oh, that's too socialistic, right? So now, again, will it rule over? No, because there is no single ethical framework that everyone can agree upon. What is also very interesting is humans don't agree on a variety of different things. If as humans we cannot agree, we cannot get a single AI. So this myth of that there being a huge AI that essentially takes over everything is, I don't think it's feasible if everyone is still aware and wakeful, right? So if you let the Western LLMs take over everything, yes, then we have those things imposed on us. But if you're not doing that, then there's going to be multiple such things. A simple example, fairness. The notion of fairness has been very well studied by social sciences. There are more than 30 plus metrics on how to define something is fair. Now, the AI can go and compute all of those metrics. Literally takes a click of a button, 30 metrics of fairness is computed. But it's not about the AI. it's my definition of fairness may be very different to your definition of fairness. And it's not also universal. It's for that particular situation, given your background and my background, I would consider something as fair and you would consider it as unfair. So that's something to do with people, nothing to do with AI. But what AI is doing now is surfacing all of those issues for us to address. So I think AI is bringing up issues which we as humanity have not solved, which may be unsolvable as well. So in that sense, I don't think there's a single place where eventually AI will take over the moral and ethical.
Yeah. Biplabji, if you permit, I had some follow-up question on this actually. So your last if people are aware, I think is the crux of the matter. So with declining ability to think, articulate, right, create as a result of the use of AI, do you envisage a scenario where even this 30 metric people sort of forget about and ask the AI to create the metric, or maybe the AI creates a metric, and just because somebody is pumping in a lot of money into one particular AI, that metric becomes dominant and eventually takes over. Maybe not in all contexts, but maybe in the Bay Area context, one metric takes over, right? With Trump around, maybe that's going to happen. And maybe in some other area, something else takes over. So the question is not just about one AI uniformly taking over. Can multiple AIs take over, primarily in the context of the declining cognitive, creative abilities of human beings? Is that possible? Do you envision?
Yeah, no, great question. So that's why I think forums like this needs to exist, and we need to be active in doing those. So can that happen? Yes, very well so, right? So there could be a group of large language model or all of these companies, and this has happened. The way some of the companies portray themselves is saying, hey, this is utility. Large language models are utility. It's like your electricity. You go plug in, get electricity, and I charge for it. And similarly, there's intelligence pipeline here. You plug into it and I'll give you the intelligence. But it's not as straightforward as that, right? So electricity is a commodity, whereas here the answer that is giving could be very different. So 1 watt of electricity is the same, whether you get it today or tomorrow, whether you get it from different providers, it's the same, whereas here it's not, right? So that's the kind of the myth that they try to promote and say, we don't want to be regulated because we are just utilities. Yes, there is a real danger of that. So that's why I think we need to be aware. And I think there is a larger acceptance that this needs to happen. Even within US, there are a lot of folks who are very much for responsible AI safety, and so on. It's just that with the current administration, the focus has shifted very much towards innovation and less towards safety. But hopefully the other countries, and I'm sure Singapore, India, and others are following more the middle path. Or again, responsible AI is not a sort of an extreme path, it's a middle path. I think that is needed so that you can at least regulate. And companies can be told, right? So in financial services is a very good notion of regulation. So every company, I said, if you're building models, these models need to be validated in a certain way. So we can all agree on what those validation method could be, which essentially reduces some of the risk. Again, another great example is the civil aviation authorities, right? So 100 years back, there were so many risks, so many accidents. So now it is much safer to fly than to cross the road, right? So how did that happen? That's basically very much ground level, identify the risk, go fix it without blaming anyone, without going and suing anyone, just identify the faults and fix it, right? So again, that's a different solution, but yes, really good to happen.
Actually, we need to move.
One comment from my side.
No, please, go. Right.
No, I think, from my perspective, that is why we're having this discussion on Dharma, because every individual have their own Dharma. So you have your Pitra Dharma, your Putra Dharma, or whatever. So everywhere, so Dharma is contextual, whereas ethics is universal. And that is where the problem starts. So that is why there's a push for sovereign AI. So, I mean, it is absolutely impossible. You have to be a skillful prompt engineer to make Gemini go against 10 Commandment. It will just not give you an answer which is antithesis to Ten Commandment. So that is the reason. I mean, not too long ago, you could ask Gemini, what is Diwali? And it used to come back with an answer like, it is Indian Christmas. So that is a way of, this somehow brainwashing different communities. So that is why there's a huge push for sovereign AI, because you don't want your indigenous knowledge to be superseded by these large language models.
So, and the other thing, just 2 minutes, that I wanted to add is to just use, to my mind, and I can be wrong here, this is not a very super technologically rigorous answer, is to just have common sense, right? Which comes from a lot of traditions, right? And confidence in our own ideas, right? I'll give you 4 examples. For about a good 10-15 years, the Finland model of education, right, until 2025, 26 was supposed to be the best school education. We have examples of Manish Sisodia, our Delhi education minister, going for weeks to Sweden to just understand what that model was. And guess what? About a month or 2 back, if I'm not wrong, Finland made a major change in their education. They digitized their classrooms. Right? Now, I was just looking at this phone before this, session for just, 10-15 minutes to make some notes. I realized that my eyes are already giving in, right? So there was a problem. That alone should convince me of the need for not using this for too long. I don't need any kind of algorithm or whatever else to really tell me that, right? Similarly, I don't think it is surprising for people in Bharat or in the US or wherever else to understand that if every classroom is digitized, that's going to be a major problem in if not anything else than just sheer eyes, right? And then they've done it, and now we will all do it because, of course, Finland has done that, right? One more example I came across. So there's somebody who has done research, Finland or Sweden, one of them, 300 plus schools. They have, after an RCT for about 1 year, they have replaced rubber mats for kids with mud and dirt based lawns, natural lawns. Can you believe that? What we have been believing in doing for the longest time ever, we got it away. And then now there is research to convince us that, well, now you again need to bring back, natural sort of play areas. Right? One more example, and this all of you, I'm sure, will absolutely love. There is one more study that recently came out, which said co-sleeping with your child can be extremely helpful because it will help them de-stress, handle emotional trauma, all of that. Right? After now, how many centuries have many families known that? Right? Just common sense.
All right. The second question. Yeah. So there were 2 questions. So the second question for
Yeah, so I'll keep it brief. It describes the process by which technology science get rooted and stay rooted in Dharma, right? So the process, I think, to me is we have to fundamentally go and redefine how these models are built from a frequency-based more to a truth-based, right? So there are multiple ways of doing it, so won't get into that. And then to be also aligned with the values, right? So again, that needs to happen from ground up as opposed to trying to refit that. I know there are various efforts in India about building on our own large language models, but it's not just building the language models, it is also building the alignment with all the things that we talk about here in Dharmic, right? So those things are the ones, I think it's more, the answer is the process and the technology is we need to, again, borrow from what we have already done in the Western world, but recreate or redevelop it so that it's more rooted to the way we want it to be.
Okay. So anyone wants to add to this comment? So I'll just add one more thing. So one is the mechanics, which Professor Rao was mentioning. The second is the funding and the people who are building the models. They should be aware that there are dharmic principles also in the world. Okay, so that is how this kind of events makes this kind of information available. Okay, so the second card, which is not addressed to anyone, is from Saurabh. How will Dharma play a role in AGI, which is Artificial General Intelligence, and how would it help establish guardrails for clinical and human behavior, ethical and human behavior? Sorry.
Okay. First things first, I think, we all talk about AGI as if it's some kind of a mystical, magical goal. And the problem there is that we do not have a sufficient definition or a sufficient kind of like a threshold at what point is an artificial intelligence general enough. And therein lies a bit of a big insight into the whole differentiation between the Western post-Kantian liberal view of the world versus dharmic view of the world. This whole idea of having one AGI to rule them all or a fully generalized intelligence is fundamentally a product of a binary of everything versus nothing and ignores the shades of grey in between. Therefore, any dharmic view on the journey towards artificial general intelligence or whatever manifestations thereof is kind of like appreciating kind of like the pathway more than that destination, because the destination is not really defined. And in that view of, I think the second part is about how this might impact human and ethical behavior. So again, like if you have to take, let's say, the idea of AGI as essentially having sufficiently advanced systems in terms of planning, reasoning, and kind of like with context and memory and knowledge in terms of like making or attaining sort of like appreciable performance in some defined human tasks or a range of human tasks. Within that behavior, I think like if you have to take a dharmic view, I think the view would be to kind of like look into the primacy or the relativism between the man and the machine, and therefore essentially the idea would be to actually kind of like set those guardrails that we were talking about earlier, that to what extent we are able to have guardrails that ensures that the knowledge base and the planning and the reasoning of such a system is based on this way of looking at it, as opposed to any particularly predefined, sort of like a Western or a very specific kind of a worldview. Because normally by nature, something that is generalized enough as a system would be used in contexts outside of that specific place where it is trained in. The other aspect is that, this concept of agency, like when you have a sufficiently powerful tool, like we talked about sort of like, being kind of enslaved by our mobile phones and so on, there is something to think about this aspect of agency and self in relation to a system that plans to or kind of promises to kind of make your lives easier by allowing you to not focus on certain aspects of your own, kind of like day-to-day existence. And that means it can be quite a bit of a significant change. And how do you manage or adapt to that change can also be informed by that idea as well. So,
the second.
Yeah, I mean, so this is where the philosophies intersect, because for us we have Brahman, and then we have Maya, and Maya is different cuts to the Brahman. So we don't have a single God or single AGI. So we believe in more context-dependent AGIs than a single universal AGI. So if you look at the Tesla, it has self-driving mode, but it does not drive like a human. It drives with its own sensors and its own optimal way of self-driving. So there will be a differences, and so just AGI is one thing, but ASI, which is very different research domain where people are looking at squirrels. So how do they geolocate? We have never been able to create a sensor which is better than a dog's nose. So these are capabilities which are there, and we are trying to figure out what will be that super intelligence, but there's not going to be a single gigantic universal AGI or anything like that.
The second part of the question is how to balance aligning technology with dharma with profit motive.
Okay. Well, like, look, I mean, first things first, I don't think profit inherently is adharmic. I think like capital creation, making money or creating wealth as opposed to money is, I think, very much a dharmic prerogative as well. Like, that's something that I do want to state, because at least in modern Indian societies that at least I grew up in, profit was somehow seen as a dirty word. So I do not think from a dharmic perspective, profit making is necessarily, a taboo. Now, if you were to think about alignment as a question, I think once again that our dominant view has been that somehow questions of alignment and safety are as if they are opposed to innovation, opposed to commercial venture creation. I don't think that's necessarily how it's going to pan out, because if you were to take the civil aviation example, 100 years of negotiations and coming together to create the 5 freedoms of the air if anything, we now have that decadal view that it has propelled that industry like never before, which having individual siloed views or narrow views towards like immediate commercialization as opposed to like having a more sustainable system in place at a global scale, that simply couldn't have achieved. And I don't see why that would be necessarily any different from, let's say, artificial intelligence as a socio-technical kind of like an artifact. And therefore, as much as like there is a diversity of humanity and therefore a diversity of like goals of alignment for an AI system, I think that itself is not inherently against this idea of like sort of like capital efficiency or revenue creation. So I think both of them can very well kind of find a way to go hand in hand.
So, I mean, we have 4 Purushastra, right? Dharma, Karma, Artha, and Moksha. So it is built into our Dharma. It is built into our 4 Purushastra. So making profits is fine, but yeah, I mean, making trillionaires, so that is where something which can be questioned.
So again, I think as everyone has said, I think making profit is one thing, right? Or getting an ROI for the business. But what I think we should also be thinking about, I think there was a very good slide that we saw yesterday. The dharmic aspects happen at various levels. It is the individual level, organizational level, and then of course societal level. So when we look at not just profits, is sort of more that middle part of company. Now, any kind of a technology, to me, dharmic or otherwise, should be thinking about how do I enhance the individual, and also how do I enhance the company, but then how do I enhance the society. Now, all the economic theories which has just focused on, again, this is primarily focused on individual and organizational. Now, of course, the Western society has realized, no, you need social impact. We need ways of measuring social impact, identifying and realizing social impact. And we missed that, right? So if you go back to Porter's 5 forces, that was not there. And then he himself came back 20 years later, said, no, there should be stakeholders which are broader than shareholders, right? So in that sense, when we take AI, we should be looking at the value that AI offers at all of these different levels. And I think that's a useful framework. So it's an impact at the social level, at the company level, and of course as individuals. And then we have talked a little bit about that.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next question. And I'm going through the order here. Some of the questions are repeats. Okay, so please don't mind if I don't go through all the things. Also, you have given us a lot of feedback with respect to the questionnaire, so we are going through them. And we'll try to make sure that most of the concerns and things are captured in the next 45 minutes. So that's the plan. Okay? So I'm going to pull out a question here, which I think is an easy question. What are your use cases for using AI, and how do you validate the results? So I'm going to ask each of the panelists here. What are your use cases for AI, and how do you validate the results? Maybe Anandji, yeah.
So one of the projects that I'm involved in, again, this goes back to how do you validate that? It's in the medical domain. So obviously what you can do in the retail versus what you can do in financial services and healthcare has to be different, because these are financial decisions, these are health related decisions. So fail fast doesn't work here, so you can't administer treatment and say, oh, sorry, missed it. Eventually I'll get it right? So that doesn't work or should not work. So what we are doing is essentially taking a specific disorder. It's actually sleep disorders. We started working with elderly care, and one of the big issues there is sleep disorder. And in order to build the sleep disorder, what we are doing is essentially creating a multi-agent system. So we are essentially creating personas of agents, personas of the nurse, persona of physician. But now, instead of deploying it, what it's essentially currently the stage where it is at, it is essentially a simulated environment. Now we are essentially going with the UPMC experts, where they are actually teaching about different sleep disorders. So this validated tool, essentially becomes a way in which they are operating that, finding out what the issues are, and actually then going and correcting that. So as they develop that trust, then they'll decide when and how to actually use it in a clinical setting, right? So the testing, especially with these advanced systems, they cannot be done, again, being an academic, I'm telling this, it cannot be proven beforehand, because it is something that takes judgment of the people, and the judgment of the people is not there sitting with the academics and the researchers there. It needs to happen at the point where people are actually using it. That's why in medical or financial areas, you need to essentially show its use. So just as there is in vitro and in the lab, so there's an in silico version of it. So develop these simulation systems, and then slowly introduce that into the community in non-critical areas, then develop the trust. So one of the things about trustworthy AI is, just by EU calling it trustworthy AI, I think they've done a disservice. Now everyone believes that if they build it in a trustworthy AI, everyone should trust. No, I think you said that. Trust is earned, not declared. So you can't declare mine is a trustworthy AI. You should all trust it. No, I should convince you, or the AI should convince you that it is trustworthy, and that happens over a time, right? So that's the way you test it. So it's not the way that we currently have. And again, the regulatory systems are not there to actually support this transition. So we are basically thinking of it much more like in a black and white kind of a situation. So that's basically the issue.
So my infamy is that my platform was used in Iraq, and that is what really drove the surge strategy. And our platform was also deployed in Afghanistan. But then the regime changed in the United States, and they stopped doing a lot of good work which we had used. So one of the things, I'll give you a simple example. So our model essentially suggested that they wanted to reconstruct a bridge, the U.S. military, and our model said send the U.S. military to the spot so that they have to build it, but the people in the military, they said, well, no, we are going to send in some of our individuals. And so, so they were almost ready to send this group, but then, the commander said, okay, let's just see how good this model is, and send U.S. Army to fix the bridge. And when they went there, they realized that it is the best thing to do, because the tribe which was there around the bridge, they were mortal enemies of the people they were going to send, and that would have completely slaughtered those people. So these are the things. It also comes down to trust, how people trust. Some of the other things which we did in urban operations and stuff. So the models really came out and worked. So in Afghanistan, we also did so we made a prediction, and then as the time progressed, and then they looked at what actually unfolded. And so there we were over 70% accurate in our prediction. And then the others, when we were not accurate, it was because we didn't have sufficient data. But so the point which I'm making, it is both what the model does, the explainability, and also the trust in the model who are using it. And essentially what happens is that the model itself becomes the reality. So people start reacting on the model, they start using the model, it becomes the reality. And then so we all become a part of the system. And so that is, I'm just plugging in my next book, which is Data Models and AI. So that is where I've tried to develop a philosophy of data, and which is heavily inspired by Advaita Vedanta, because there is no philosophy of data, and there's no real epistemology on that. So that is what I've tried to develop. And so we are also developing actually a startup is coming out in financial industry based on the concepts I've developed in that.
So others, most beneficial aspect and the worst impact. If you want to go.
This is for applying AI systems in our daily work, or what is the exact question?
Repeat the question.
Repeat the question.
Okay, there are lots of... Second one, what is the most exciting, beneficial, and what is the worst impact of AI do you foresee? Okay, I think the word foresee is important. So in terms of looking into the crystal ball and gazing into the future, I think purely in terms of the beneficial aspect, I do see kind of an exhaustion of humanity to question its own grounding and its own sense of self. For once we have an opportunity to truly ask the question, what does it mean to be human? And ask it very substantially in relation to something that we have created. And that I see being the most beneficial and exciting aspect, over and above obviously more immediate gains in productivity or kind of more, human flourishing, etc. Like say discovering new medicines, discovering new cures, so on and so forth. In terms of what is the worst impact of AI do I foresee? Again, the worst impact that I do foresee, and we do see some evidence of it already, is kind of humans letting go of their own sense of self and agency and then their own kind of prerogatives. And a practical domain in which I do see this working out in daily practice is this whole thing around de-skilling of professionals who, due to the very extensive usage of LLMs or co-pilots and co-scientists and so on, sometimes tend to be not well versed in the techniques and the experience, or the learned knowledge that would normally be considered standard for them. There are editorials out on this in Nature Medicine, etc., about de-skilling in physicians, for example, and I do see some of this also coming in more on the drug discovery and the medicinal chemistry side in my daily job, that increasingly you have generations who, due to being AI native, are kind of forgetting to be human native in some aspects.
Yeah, no, the worst impact I think is just the decline in cognitive abilities that we will see, cognitive articulation, all of that, right? So just our intelligence going down because artificial intelligence is going up. I think that is the worst possible impact. Beneficial impact, so I have a little different take on that. I think what should be is we using AI to sort of answer questions that we think are important, rather than AI taking over also what questions do we want to ask. So as long as AI answers those questions and keeps the control in my hands, I think that's the most beneficial thing that it can do.
So one thing, it may be controversial, so I just may flag it. So, we know there's a halal economy which is $7 trillion supposedly. And there are different AIs which are coming in. So there is Islamic AI which is coming from Saudi Arabia and UAE. And then we have the Western AI, and then we have our own AIs. So it is not that what large language models are. But as these products starts being used in, as these AI are being used in in products, so that is where certain type of promotion of certain ideas starts to happen. And if we are not very careful, then there will be a halal AI which will start, and unless and until you have a halal AI, those products won't be used by certain community. So these are the things which we'll have to face it, and we have to face it head on, because if we don't face it head on, then we will run into a problem. And this is a lot more dangerous than halal mixture and halal vegetables and halal hotels.
Yeah. So I think the negatives have been covered. So just in terms of the beneficial aspects, so one of the things that I find very useful is that AI is now essentially forcing ourselves or encouraging ourselves to see where we add value. Now, as AI does more and more of the things that we are doing, you really need to question whether it's at an individual level or at a company level, what value am I adding? So that essentially pushes me to do things that I wouldn't have done before. And it also is definitely liberating in the sense that now, with the help of AI, you can do things that you needed other people to partner with in order to do. So now the gap between an idea and the execution or the implementation of it is basically shrunk, both in terms of time and the resources needed. And that's, of course, the negative side of that is the impact on jobs. But the positive side of that, I think Nitinji was mentioning yesterday, is entrepreneurship. You are going to see far more individuals saying, I've got the idea, I can do it with the help of the AI, as opposed to having a whole army of people helping you and having the funding to do it. So I think that, in the sense, is liberating if you know how to really use it and harness it.
Right. I will also take on the question, because I do develop AI. So the most beneficial thing which I see is what I call artificial general health intelligence. So if we ever get to AGI, it will be through parts of health, through parts of finance, through parts of everyday life. And health is exercise, sleep, mental health, and so on, as we heard. So can we do recommendation in each one of these things? And can all of them come together? So that's one of the things which I hope will really come out. The worst thing is, when I was in 2 decades in industry, many people would come and tell me, nothing is solved by technology alone. Problems are solved through process, people, and technology. So I hope people don't think that just AI somehow will miraculously solve all the world's problems. It cannot lift a single table, AI. So if people start thinking that somehow just with AI, problems will miraculously get solved, that is the worst thing possible. We have to work collectively, we have to work with the processes and with people, not independent of them. Okay, so the other question, many communities have mastered the mechanics of recommendation algorithms in social media. How do you create a task force to expose these biases and form a strategy to make dharmic content more accessible to a general user? So that was the question. Anyone wants to take it? Yeah.
See, if you look at all the AIs, so for example, Claude uses rewards versus helpfulness model. So they have to use 2 reward models. One is helpfulness, and then the other one is safety. OpenAI, ChatGPT, they use a constitution layer. Gemini, they don't tell what model they use, but they also use a safety models. So all these models are essentially restricting what you can make it do, unless until you develop a prompting skills. So when I use an uncensored model, and I use it locally so that I can make it do what I want it to do. So these AI models, which are, sorry, I forgot the question. So
the question was, how do you create a task force?
Yeah, right.
And form a strategy.
Yes. So the task force, I mean, when I was involved with G20 task force on number of things, and so one of the things which we have to do is to really understand how these safety models work and how it is restricting it. So the task force should be looking at, I mean, so like from here, so we should look at how we can work with the weights model. So I mean, everything has to do with the weights table, and so that is where all the knowledge exists. And so when we are training, we can do more specialized training on dharmic principles. So what are those dharmic principles which we want to do? Because we have 6 different, we have Shat Darshan, so we have 6 darshanas, and then we have our constitution. So how we can combine them to come up with a with a more balanced way of doing things. For example, I'm developing a platform called Saptarishi, where we are using 6 darshanas and also the constitution for evaluating different legal decisions, and also looking at Panchtantra and other stories and what type of dharmic instances which they are teaching. So these stories are not just stories, because they are teaching certain dharmic principles in each of those stories, which are coming from our shastras. So how they are communicated, and they are for different age groups. So those are the types of things which should be pursued. That it is something which we are doing, that is on the positive side. On the negative side, like if you have all these rating agencies and others, so what methodologies they are using, and so especially with all these AIs and understanding their filter models, so those user constitution models, so we can explore that. And that is something which the AI mission and others which we need to do. And in the future, as the quantum computers are coming in, so if you look at the vector database, it uses abstract vector space. So whereas in quantum, the only difference between quantum mathematics and the vector space which is used by LLM is that LLMs are all the dimensions are real, whereas in quantum you have an imaginary layer. So one of the things which we are exploring is if we can use the imaginary layer as an inbuilt dharmic principles there. So you're not bolting on dharma or ethics on an LLM, but it can be native to that. And so those are the things which can be pursued.
So probably take a little bit of a contrarian view, or maybe a more provocative view here. Now, I know we are in a conference of Dharma, right? So now when we want it to be dharmic, now do we all, I know there are a number of definitions yesterday on dharmic, but our philosophies are also very much multifaceted philosophies. Is there task force for what? Task force for coming up and codifying the dharmic principles? Between Advaita Vedanta, Dvaita, Vishishta Dvaita? That conversation has happened. That's just 3 that I mentioned. There are far more. Have been going on for centuries. So are we trying to codify that for the AI? Will we ever be able to, when all of the other rishis and others have not been able to? Because there's a fundamental, it's not just one philosophy, there are multiple philosophies. Again, we'll fall into the same trap as there's a set of ethical AI principles for the West. There's not. But similarly, is there a specific set of dharmic principles that everyone can agree on? I doubt that. And it's a challenge, right? So can we actually agree on everything? Of course, you get some of the Advaitic Vedantic philosophers, they'll say these are the kinds of principles. And I can mention a few where some of those will be not acceptable for some of the other areas. Looking at it very much from a Dvaitic point of view versus an Advaitic point of view, there are principles that are contradictory very clearly. So yes, we can form a task force very limited for whatever group that you want it to reflect, but to just think that we just sort of commented on the Westerners and said, hey, they can't get the ethical principles right, but can we get the dharmic principles consistent across all facets of what we have? I don't think so.
I just want to make it. So there was never an implication that there has to be a single, so that whole purpose of this is that you have the multifaceted view of the world, because that is what we are sitting here for. I mean, if you look at just the Brahma Sutra. So Brahma Sutra, single text, Sankaracharya is looking at it from Advait, Madhvacharya, and so everyone is looking at a different thing. The same text, it is Advait, it is Dvait, it is Vishishta Dvait. So that is not the thing. So it is just able to provide all those lens. If we are training an AI with all these Shat Darshanas, then we have all the different views, and in fact you can also have debates.
Only fear is the task force will become just
no, it may not be. It is just the task force will be what is the corpus to generate. So that is what it needs to do.
So in response to your provocation also, it's also instructive that these doubts and questions appear only to dharmic people. Right? When the West had to make an AI, it didn't even occur to them. They just went ahead and did that, right? And then a handful of people, I mean, they didn't even think of consistency as a consistent principle, right? They just did whatever they had to. And then depending on whatever could attract more investments, financial thought, otherwise, just made it. Why can't for once, and this is my provocation now, why can't for once we also take that approach? Right? So a group of us think about something. It may not be perfect. It may not be, completely consistent, not complete. But then we just go ahead and do that and, leave it to the world and let it evolve.
Yeah. I think generally in the spirit of the question that, maybe there isn't enough of like a sort of like a dharmic view represented in commercially available systems that we have today. I think the solution is really simple. I mean, most of you American Hindus are the richest community in this country. I mean, nothing stops you from actually incubating startups that does exactly that. Let it be all of the 6, darshanas reflected. Let it be startups on agentic systems with multi-agent systems representing and having those debates. So I don't think there is any hands tied on this. At the end of the day, a lot of the current systems we have, commercial ones, they were built as profit-making machines, obviously in a far greater time horizon, rather than any philosophically or deeply, kind of involved technologies that their founders would make you believe. And therefore, let your money speak. I mean, it's really simple.
Okay, so that question raised a lot of discussion. I'm going to have 2 to 3 more questions, okay, from here. Then we do have feedback from your survey. We will take a couple from there, and then we'll wrap up this session. Okay, you have been a very patient audience and a very interactive audience as well. So this one is really about technology in Bharat. Bharat's civilization still has small farmers as a major part of society. How would quantum computing plus AI plus robotics transform and help these small farmers having just 5 to 50 acres of land parcel? Anyone wants to?
So I think just sort of stepping back, the way the Western countries sort of automated agriculture has been very much in the large lands, right? So basically take up small holdings and then make it bigger and bigger, and then you can employ all the technology to get better. So that's how, I don't know what the percentage was, but somewhere from 20-30%, we have come down to, I think, 6-7% of the population needs to be agriculture. They can feed the entire world. Now, what I think AI and automation is doing is that now I think you don't need those big ones you have with the robotics and the stuff that's happening. You can go to a much smaller field level as well. And it's also, I was involved almost 10 years back now with a company called climate.com, which got bought out by a couple, Monsanto. And they were essentially just a bunch of 100-odd scientists sitting in California who had no clue about, they were not farmers, but they were data science people who essentially were able to tell precisely when to plant a seed, when to harvest, how much to irrigate, all based on just the modeling and the modeling that evolved over time. So they were able to do much better than many of the other models because they're not looking for a universal model. So those kinds of things exist now. So I think from both the software side, as well as from the automation that's happening, I think AI can actually help the small holdings mechanize and then get that productivity, right? So, but the gap would obviously be the technology and the availability of the technology, people to be able to fix it. And then, of course, these technologies, typically what we have seen, don't work in India. It needs to be indigenous technology, right? So, but the things can be borrowed, but developed indigenously.
One important point here, like when you talk about specific problems, like let's say, farmers doing AI or quantum, etc., I think the technology is actually quite a secondary part of the puzzle. Like when you talk about small holdings in India for farmers, for example, as much as AI, robotics, etc., can lead to immediate process efficiencies, a lot of the bottleneck lies in how we have structured our marketing and our supply chains around agricultural produce, and how kind of like family dynamics influences how transfer of those kind of properties happen. So the challenges are far greater than something that is discretely identifiable as being amenable to redressal by the fanciest new tool that is developed for maybe somewhere like maybe a larger farm, etc. So a lot of that indigenous technology or adoption of the technology or development thereof thus requires a very strong kind of like a cognizance of the social and the supply chain and the governance aspects of it.
I'll take it later. Please go ahead. He also had something.
Okay. So that is a very good point made. So we did some work in Jharkhand. So I'm from Ranchi, and there, if you go 20-30 miles from Ranchi, the farmers there are in destitute conditions. So in 2012-13, when I started working with them, so they were making around 5,000 rupees a year, and they were all marginal farmers. And then most of the households, men had migrated to Ranchi to do dihadi or physical labor, and then only women and children and elderly were left behind. So we started a program called Manufacturing on Wheels, or Factories on Wheels, manufacturing as a service. So we configured a pickup truck with rice milling and separation in machines, small ones, and we took it to the farmers so right after harvest. And they were able to, right after harvest, so it will do the thrashing and it will do the separation, packaging, and they were paid right then and there. So the time from they harvested and they got paid for it reduced dramatically, and they changed their lives significantly. So right now we are looking at different places to implement this model, and so here. So it is like Uberization of factories on wheels. So that is where AI is really helping. And then, how to jig the machines and, how do you replace them so you can pretty much create a recession-resistant supply chain.
So I'll again strike a note of caution here. So I think personally, having been to several places in Bharat, of all kinds, I think we need to be a little cautious and not believe that we have a set of technologies which have really solved all problems and can solve all our problems, right? So I think if the technology emerges from the needs, understanding, wisdom, and context of the place where it is applied, it will probably be able to really transform that place. Otherwise, it will end up doing things that nobody expected. Right? So in this context, for example, imagine what is the best output that is possible out of the use of quantum AI robotics. Right? The best outcome possible, apart from adding to what you said, which is the supply chains and everything else have to be figured out. Because if there are people. Governments have lost elections, just to add to your point, when productivity increased significantly to the extent that the markets were not ready and prices went down and farmers had to literally throw their onions and tomatoes on road, right? And that led to its own chain of events, which led to the losing of an election of one government. So I hope the government has policy advisors to sort of consider all of that, if they ever consider the use of such technologies at any sort of large scales when the people themselves did not ask for it, right? But the other example that I was going to add from my side is the best possible outcome of all of this is that, productivity is sorted, amazing, output, great yield, supply chain sorted, so product has reached where it is supposed to, good price discovery, so prices are all good, everything is happening well, for God's sake, they've also made their companies, and so they're also on the stock market, and great, and they've also become maybe billionaire, right? Maybe there's a unicorn that has emerged from all of that, right? But then, after doing all of that, the question that we will need to answer is, what does the farmer do now with all the free time that he or she has? Right? Is it a lot of alcohol? Is it leaving the village? right? And then trying to crowd the overcrowded Delhi and Mumbai, right? What exactly should the farmer do? So unless we take a holistic view, and no one person can take that holistic view, and therefore, to my mind, I'm a technologist, right? I'm a technology professor, but to my mind, a technology that feels that I am the solution and I'm looking for problems now should be flipped, and the problem should identify what the technology is, what the solution is. So that need for the technology has to emerge from places where it is supposed to transform. Otherwise there'll be issues. Just one small example. So Balu, who is also now on the Niti Aayog, right, he's written a book about his experiences in the grassroots, We the People, or I the People, something like that. A very interesting example. So not to be taken literally, doesn't mean that we don't need to have any development, just indicates that development has to be need driven and thought through. So he gives this example where the government made water accessible for some Vanavasi area, and the women there were cursing that development. They had to walk miles, kilometers earlier to get water, and now they did not. And so obviously all of us think, well, that's a great idea, but these women did not like it. The reason was that they felt that the time spent in walking was a time for community building, for sharing thoughts, for exchanging emotions, right? All of that. And now that is all gone, the community building has stopped. Right? So it doesn't mean that we don't need to create wells and lakes and all of that, but the need has to emerge from the context, rather than the technology saying, I will give you a context for the use of technology.
So another question, this is to Arijit Ji, is how data behind AI be designed to avoid it going out of hands or make it more trustworthy? Really difficult.
Okay, so you talk about data behind AI be designed to avoid it going out of hands or make it more trustworthy. Good question. Now, there are a few things to consider here. The first is, whose trust are we talking about? And whose responsibility for the trust are we going to be talking about? Like when you look at it from the data layer, that immediately creates a couple of contradictions. One is that we talk about building foundation models for all of the large language models we have, or a lot of the large visual models, etc. Increasingly the physical realization of that in embodied AI and so on. Inherently, a lot of that design process involves large-scale self-supervised learning, where you do not necessarily have annotations on your data. You do geometric transformations or other kinds of manipulations like mask image modeling or leaving kind of parts of a sentence out and so on. And that is kind of this training, from technical parlance, is fairly agnostic to the actual data that is involved. And then a lot of the final performance that you see of these models is through a process known as fine-tuning. Different ways of doing it. There is a lot of RLHF is fundamentally fine-tuning using a reward model. There is something called supervised fine-tuning, etc., and so on and so forth. So there are two distinct stages, at least in the current form of like a lot of the deployments that we have in a lot of these commercially available language models, for example, two distinct stages where the data question becomes prominent. Now, in the first, a lot of the data that has been used thus far has been essentially data from a mishmash of sources, open world data sets, a lot of data sets of questionable copyright provenance, a lot of data sets from different kinds of training data sets compiled for actually a variety of purposes that are not necessarily tuned to a final application. And then the second stage, which I think where we have the best opportunity till date of actually incorporating the notion of trust, responsibility, safety, and cultural alignment, among others. And that is where I think there is an ability to kind of undertake fine-grained, very careful curation of the final fine-tuning stages of the model. So that is point one. Now, there are other kinds of research on this in terms of how you might make even the first stage more aligned, and whether or not there is an ability to kind of curate, expert curated data sets of a smaller number of examples as opposed to undertaking large scale pre-training, for example. But till date, pure like a lot of the deployment settings, it is in the second stage where you have the data that can be designed, in fact, for these kind of alignment questions. And my suggestion here, like for those of you that want to work on this question, is to consider 4 things. 1, consider the end users or the primary end users of the specific application area that you are considering, and what their unique positioning and context needs to be, because trust at the end of the day is context dependent, and trust at the end of the day needs to be earned specific to the audience that you are talking to. So for example, if you were to take once again a dharmic view on this, you need to really consider the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam aspect of, like, translating your thoughts into action to the outer world, and that I think is fundamental to the data curation aspect at this stage. The second, considerations of like your kind of like the quality of judgment and the quality of like interaction that you want to have with the user, kind of like this whole aspect of like prioritizing the user and the user experience, that translated once again from a more inclusive dharmic point of view that kind of does not necessarily consider shades of gray between good versus bad, but is more context and relativist. I think that is very much applicable to the curation of the data aspect as well. The third is considering the application domain and the legal risk and the specific safety questions that might emerge, and this is very true for sensitive domains like healthcare. And here there is something else that needs to be factored in, the diversity aspect of the datasets and the potential for bias and explainability around those. So this is something that like there's something to note. At the end of the day, the data layer is possibly one of the most human layers of AI, come to think of it. And this is where a lot of that vivek and the human judgment and the the broad view of like considering the diversity of humanity comes in. And this also kind of informs the fourth aspect, is that there is a lot of like discussion on technical aspects of what makes an artificial intelligence system safe, things like bias, fairness, explainability, and so on. End of the day, despite the 30 plus metrics we have for fairness, for example, the thing is hugely relational. Like for healthcare, fairness has a very different meaning, where your standard demographic parity mathematics falls in the face of the fact that certain communities, for example, do have a preponderance towards certain conditions and diseases, and therefore like group fairness must lead way to aspects of contrastive fairness and counterfactual examples. So all of these are technical and social and legal considerations that needs to be undertaken in a more holistic view of the world. And like I said before, I want to reiterate, the data layer is possibly one of the most human layers of AI that will ever be, even when you are generating synthetic data.
Okay. I will like to switch now to some of the points made from the online survey, and then give a couple of minutes for everyone to just wrap up, please. Okay. So apart from the questions which were asked on the cards, we had asked you about the use cases you care about, the dharmic principles you care about, what kind of challenges you are looking at. I just wanted to share some of the quick results, and sorry they are not getting projected. 75% of the audience relates to AI and data science here in the room. 8% with the robotics, digital chips, and so on. With biology and related ones, about 29. Something is wrong with the maths here. 29%, and about 19% with the materials, chemistry, and so on.
Multiple selections, I think multiple choices.
Maybe this is because of that. Yeah, multiple selections. But I think our discussion was on technology, on AI for a long time, for a major part of the thing, and many of you related to it. Among the topics that was really pressing for you was environment related, about 75%, health related, about 77%, 41% related to finance, and with respect to family interpersonal things was about 51%. So telling about lies, telling about comparison and those things, people were relating to it. In terms of moral and ethical principles, I think covered all of that here. There is one question which was about what are some of the questions people will like to be discussed, and I don't think one of them has been covered, which is, I think it's from a student, but I would like the panel to discuss career challenges for upcoming young technocrats in the AI world. So would the panel like to say something about that? If you were an undergrad right now, what would you do? Change the major?
You want to go first? I'll start. So the way I at least talk to the students, think of the careers that are evolving in sort of three buckets, right? So again, depending on what you want to do, you may go into a particular area. So one is careers which will make the AI better. In spite of all the challenges, there'll still be jobs for people who understand AI, who understand various aspects of it to make the AI better, whether it's AGI, ASI, whatever else we define, right? So, or redefine based on old stuff, we'll continue to do that. So there's just definitely one group, but that's going to be a much smaller group. The other extreme is there are going to be jobs, and always will be jobs, where the human element overrides everything else. So I'll give an example. Sports. So people would want to watch other people play sports, not robots play sports, right? So yes, there's robo soccer and all of the academics here we would love to have a robot play soccer and do all of that, but that's just the value that we attach just for the technology. But for the large proportion, people will be, so those kinds of industries will actually increase. So that would be sports, that would be performing arts, right? So that's spirituality, right? So all of those things which are innately human, we'll probably get more time to spend on that, and then obviously there will be professions and there'll be things that'll enable that, right? So that's the human related stuff, and then everything in between, I call it X plus AI. And the X can be anything. So it can be biotech, it can be your mechanical engineering, it can be your agriculture, whatever it is. Just don't be afraid of AI. Don't shun AI, especially if you're younger. But pursue your passion, but have the AI as a plus AI. So that way, you're always safe, but you're also rooted in whatever that you are passionate about. So don't ignore the AI, but take up your passion and use AI as a backdrop, right? So that's the sort of the rough bucket. So again, you can decide which career you want, but there's going to be enough opportunity for biologists with the AI minor, if you like, or engineers with there's a big upsurge of mechanical engineers with all the automotive engineering and so on, right? So in that sense, there will be jobs, but always have it with the AI.
See, as an educator, the problem is with us, because we don't want to change as quickly as we want our students to change. So when students are using the example which I gave, in our discipline, what is happening? So we are all using AI to write our papers, and the papers then get submitted. It goes to the journal. It goes to the reviewers. Reviewers use AI to review the papers. So again, where we started, we have come back to that point where AI is writing the papers and AI is reviewing the papers, and then AI is revising the paper, then AI is, so this cycle is continuing. And also in our classroom, we don't want to change the curriculum, but we want students not to use AI, and we call it cheating. So, so the problem again comes back to us, that whenever we are interacting with a system, we become part of the system. If you look at high school rating games, so when ratings started, then teachers started to teach the student based on their ratings so that the ratings can improve. So they're not really treating the students as students with an infinite potential. So they are just narrowing the students to perform well on the test so that the school's rating goes up, so that the funding is better for them. So this whole system is flawed. So if you are looking at what to pursue, so we have to change ourselves. It is not just the students. We have to change our curriculum so that we challenge the students. So we don't teach the fundamentals of Python programming in the classroom, because they can do it better with AI. So we should teach the programming principles, and so how these AIs have been trained, so that they can think deeper and understand deeper. So that is true for all the disciplines. So now you have a great teaching assistant. So use that teaching assistant to drill deeper into the concepts. We never really got into the concepts when we were in school. So we always got to a certain level, but we never really went deeper into it. So for example, we take temperature. So we take temperature for granted. So we are learning about Charles' law and Boyle's law and all those things we understood. But we never really understood what temperature was, because temperature was essentially measuring the kinetic energy between molecules, which this device is capturing and throwing out a number. So that is where this recursion, this loop is happening. So you are developing models to measure certain or observe and measure certain phenomena, and that phenomena generates transactions, which generates the data, and then the data goes into another model, which generates another model. So AI is nothing but a continuous loop at a very massive scale, so which takes data and models and generates that. So we start with some knowledge, then we embed it, then it goes through this a deep learning mechanism, and so you do all those processing. It ends up as a weight table, and now that is what it is generating the results. But this whole process, so where what data really is and what data we are talking about, that data is essentially a transaction. So in an absolute sense, data is the given which exists. You have an instrument which makes the data legible, and that becomes a transaction, and all these transactions which essentially go into the AI. So the depth of our understanding and knowledge, that is what we should be pursuing, both as educators as well as the students, because now we can explore the depth which we were not able to do earlier.
So, if students come to me, the first thing that I try to do is to understand where they're coming from and what their capability and, innate interests are. So, there are students who want to do different things. So for them, the idea is to go into entrepreneurship and use AI and whatever technologies you might have. For those students who want to go completely the traditional way, what Anandji just described is a great way. Just learn AI, keep that as a tool, and maybe even make new AIs, but that's one. But the most interesting set for me is the third one, which is those who really have the ability to think completely differently, right? And transform and change things and not be caught up in what is going on right now. So for them, my response actually is to just, of course, pick up AI as a skill, right? But then do remember that this country has the ability and the gall to throw something at you every 2 decades and make you believe that that is the best thing that's ever happened to the world, right? So 80s to 2000 was the internet, then it was the .com, then it was social media, now it is AI, and we're already preparing for quantum. So new technology waves do come, and if you're really interested and you have the guts and the ability to think beyond what people usually think, then also look at other technologies, completely new ideas. Maybe you'll become a pioneer and set trends rather than only following them.
Okay.
I need to stop. We have been alerted a number of times that our time is getting up. So I would like the panelists to conclude with just one word. Okay? So you're concluding one word if everyone wants to kind of say.
Yeah, AI can't replace human irrationality. So that makes us human. So be rational.
Okay. One word summary if you want to give.
4 T's, and I have to then of course explain that, right? One word is 4 T's. So one purpose also of the entire session was to give you actionable insights, and I'll borrow from what my colleague here just said. The Hindu American, Indian American community is quite powerful. Just gain confidence in your tradition, your ideas, your models, your philosophy, your dharma, and trust the fact that the civilization has endured for such a long time, and it was indeed actually one of the best in sort of all possible measures. Trust, that's first T. If you can't do much, just tinker around, right? So think of how existing technologies can be used for things, for things that we want to do as a civilization, right? As a community. Third, trip turn around things, right? So if you can change the technological methods as well, being inspired from Dharma, I really like the idea that Alok ji here mentioned, which is if quantum computing really comes that way and there is an imaginary layer, then maybe infusing that imaginary layer with some ideas that we have from Dharma might be quite powerful. So tinker. But then the last one is really the most important. If you have the guts, right, the 4 T's, topple the existing paradigm, right, and really think about how this entire way of looking at things and technology and everything around it can be challenged, questioned, be inspired by what our civilization has to offer. 4 T's.
Okay. Alokji, one word.
So for me, one word is Vivek or discernment.
I was thinking of going for Viveka, now I'll go with Vairagya.
Vairagya. And to sum up the event, I'm just going to say Sholay. Namaste.
We're not concluding yet. These powerful and elite panelists, they have given us so much, so it's time for us to give them something. So if I can request our local welcoming committee member Pankaj Ji Jagtap to come here and give our panelists token memento. Thank you, Pankaj. All right, now I think after kind of we filled our mind with all these things, it's time to fill our belly, right? So the lunch is going to be served outside. If you go on the right side, there is a room called as downtown. We're not going to Houston downtown. There's a room called as downtown where we'll have the lunch served there. We'll have at 2 p.m. the next set of sessions will be happening. So if you're interested in the technology session, it will happen here. If you're interested in the health session, it will happen in Bayou. So if you're interested in the same session, you can come here and you can be here as well. There are two other things. There's a book of sale, like we have books to sale, and that sale is happening outside. There are multiple authors that you can you can get the books from. Just go outside, there are books, you can check them out. And there is one more. I don't have there was a form here. We have a form. If you have suggestions, if you have any feedback, you can fill that up and provide to any of the people in support. Okay, all right, so we will start right at 2 p.m. So we'll need to come back here